You know that feeling when your whole body goes numb, not because you're cold, but because someone you love says something that makes you realize, finally, irreversibly, you've never really been seen? That moment hit me at 32, as I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, folding surgical scrubs with machine-like precision, my new life just 2 days away. And then, through the paper-thin walls of our house, I heard my mother's voice float down the hall like poison carried on a breeze. Leah's strong. Emily's the one who really needs us. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch. I just folded the last scrub top, placed it gently into my suitcase, and let the seed of something much darker take root in my chest. Growing up, I was what you'd call the quiet success story, the dependable one, the daughter who knew how to disappear and still leave the house cleaner than she found it. I never required applause, never expected a standing ovation. All I ever wanted, truly, was to be seen. Not for what I could do. Not for how useful I was. But for who I actually was. That, unfortunately, was too much to ask in our house. My sister Emily was the golden one. The radiant firework in a sky where I was the faintest star. Where I excelled quietly, honor roll certificates, science fair trophies, a perfect record of volunteer hours, Emily would stumble into the spotlight, eyes wide and lip trembling, and somehow command the universe to rotate just for her. My accomplishments, though numerous, were often met with a distracted, "That's nice, honey," followed by a full breakdown from Emily because someone looked at her wrong in the cafeteria. I remember being 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table, carefully gluing together a model of the solar system for a school project. My fingers were sticky, my concentration laser-focused. And then Emily, age 6, came down the stairs in tears because her favorite stuffed bunny had lost an eye. Our mother, in one swift movement, swept her into her arms, murmuring comfort like it was a song only Emily deserved. "You poor thing. That must have been so scary for you." She never even glanced at the Pluto that had rolled off the table, never asked what I was working on. By 12, I had learned how to be invisible without feeling resentful. Or at least, I told myself that. I helped around the house, kept my grades high, and learned not to interrupt when Emily was having one of her episodes, which, in our house, was shorthand for anything that might inconvenience her emotionally. My father, a soft-spoken man who hated conflict the way some people fear heights, rarely intervened. If Emily cried, he left the room. If I cried, he told me I was too sensitive. When I was 17, something remarkable happened. I earned a full-ride scholarship to one of the top pre-med programs in the country. I remember standing in the kitchen, the acceptance letter in my hand, practically vibrating with pride. I was about to read it out loud when Emily came storming in, sobbing because her boyfriend had cheated on her, again. My mother turned to her with urgency, ignoring the open envelope in my hand. "Oh, sweetheart, come here. Let's sit down and talk about it." I was asked to defer the next year. Emily, they said, was in crisis. She needed the family. "You can wait a year, Leah," Mom said. "You're strong." I did wait. 1 year turned into 2. Emily's crisis evolved, first anxiety, then mysterious fatigue, then mood swings that demanded every ounce of family energy. There was no diagnosis, no treatment plan, just an understanding that Emily was fragile, and I was expected to carry the weight she couldn't. Eventually, I moved away. I completed med school with honors. I published research. I built a life in another city, a colder, quieter, more reliable place. I returned home only for holidays and birthdays, often finding my seat already taken, my achievements glossed over in favor of Emily's latest dramatic anecdote. She had started a podcast about mental health, calling herself an advocate, despite never seeing a therapist or acknowledging the ways she'd dismantled those around her. And yet, here I was again, back in that same childhood room. My plane ticket was printed. My lease signed. I had been offered a position in a prestigious neuroscience research program, one that would take me across the country, away from the gravitational pull of Emily's orbit. But as I zipped up my bag, my ears caught that damning sentence from my mother. Leah's strong. Emily's the one who really needs us. It wasn't just the words. It was the ease with which she said them, like it was obvious, like it was the law of the universe. That moment burned. Not because it was new, but because it confirmed what I had spent a lifetime suspecting. I stayed up that night, staring at the ceiling, remembering every time I had made myself smaller to give Emily room to feel important. I remembered missing my senior prom to babysit her after she locked herself in the bathroom over a B-. I remembered the countless times I cooked dinner because Mom was too exhausted from dealing with Emily's moods, and I remembered being told, again and again, that I was the lucky one because I didn't need attention to survive. But here's what no one seemed to realize. Invisibility is not the same as strength. Being overlooked does not make you invulnerable. And eventually, even the most patient daughter begins to wonder what it would feel like to be the center of the story. So I made a decision that night, quietly and without ceremony. I would leave. I would build my life, piece by piece, in a city where no one knew me as Emily's sister. I would let my accomplishments speak loudly. And I would stop apologizing for existing in the shadows. But I also knew something else, something colder, sharper. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because the perfect daughter, the strong one, the one who never needed anything, she was about to rewrite the script. I had 24 hours left. One day more and I would be free. That morning, I woke up to the filtered gray light pushing through the old blinds in my childhood bedroom, dust catching the sunbeams like tiny specters of every version of myself I had tried to leave behind. The suitcase sat zipped by the door, a new life folded meticulously inside it, layers of curated autonomy, pressed ambition, and muted hope stitched into every hem. My ticket was digital, my research papers already sent ahead. Everything was waiting for me. Everything except them. I had made peace, or something like it, with the fact that I was leaving without a send-off, without a speech, or even a simple, "We're proud of you." My mother hadn't asked for my flight time. My father, always too careful not to tip the household equilibrium, hadn't dared bring it up at all. Emily had posted something vague and sentimental on Instagram, "Endings make room for beginnings," and it was accompanied by a selfie of her crying in soft lighting. No mention of me. Just the aesthetic of loss. So when the doorbell rang that night, at a time no one visited unannounced, something inside me froze. I didn't rush down. I stayed still long enough to hear the front door open, my father's voice low and confused, and then chaos, like it had always followed her in. I heard Emily crying before I saw her, that specific brand of weeping she had mastered in childhood. It wasn't the soft trembling of grief or the hollow echo of pain. It was theatrical, rhythmic, calibrated just right to pierce through walls and pull attention like a magnet. When I stepped into the hallway, I saw her folded into my mother's arms like a discarded doll someone had tried to put back together. Her eyes were red, but her makeup perfect, untouched. My mother turned toward me with that expression she reserved for matters of grave importance, the one where her lips tightened into a straight line and her hands folded theatrically across her chest like she was praying in a war zone. "Leah," she said in a tone heavy enough to drown a cathedral. "We didn't want to tell you like this." There was a script, I realized. They had rehearsed this moment. My stomach clenched before she even said it. "It's Emily. She has leukemia." The world didn't stop. It didn't slow. It didn't do anything cinematic. But something in me, some internal lever of motion, jammed violently, like gears grinding metal instead of turning. Emily sobbed harder, pressing her face into our mother's shoulder as if trying to disappear. I stood still, unsure whether to speak, unsure whether this was real or just the latest manifestation of a family crisis masquerading as divine purpose. I didn't want to say anything," Emily managed through muffled hiccups. "I didn't want to ruin your big moment." It was the most practiced lie I'd ever heard. And yet I nodded. Because that's what I did. I nodded. I said nothing. We need to get you tested, my mother said next, already moving past Emily's grief into logistics. It's possible you could be a match. She needs a donor. You're her only hope. My jaw clenched before I could even form a response. My research program started in less than 72 hours. My plane left in less than one. And this bombshell of obligation had been timed with surgical precision. I haven't even seen her medical records, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice from cracking like ice on a pond. What kind of leukemia? What are the treatment options? What have the doctors said? My mother didn't blink. It's aggressive, she replied quickly. But they say a transplant would give her the best chance. That phrase sat wrong in my ears. Not only chance. Not life or death. The best chance. I filed that away. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Instead, I stared at my ceiling and remembered every time Emily had faked fainting in high school to get out of a test. I remembered the night she screamed that she couldn't breathe because I refused to let her borrow my clothes. I remembered how Mom always believed her. By morning, I had canceled the flight. The testing took less than a week, but the wait felt like living inside a bell jar, every sound muffled, every second stretched like taut fabric. When the results came back, I was the match. Of course I was. It felt inevitable, like the family script had been written in advance, and I was merely acting out my assigned part. I asked questions. I demanded details. And that's when the truth started to unravel. Her oncologist, a dry but decent man with nervous hands, explained that while Emily's leukemia was real, it wasn't yet terminal. Treatment had already begun, and her body was responding. A transplant, he admitted with some discomfort, wasn't necessary, just optimal. It could improve the long-term prognosis, he said, but many patients do well without one. And yet, at home, the story was different. My mother emphasized urgency. Emily wept at the table, whispering, "I'm scared, Leah. I don't want to die." The words echoed, but I noticed she never missed her scheduled live streams, never canceled a single therapy dog visit for her social media campaign. Her hair remained perfect, styled into soft curls even during chemo, thanks to the support wigs gifted by her followers. I started hesitating. Not out of cruelty, but out of confusion. I wasn't a stranger to hospitals. I worked in them. I studied illness with the detachment of someone who understood molecular decay and immune suppression at a cellular level. And nothing about this looked urgent. And that's when it happened. The leak. First, it was a cousin messaging me from California. "Are you really refusing to help Emily?" I can't believe this. Then a colleague from med school tagged me in a passive-aggressive post about family obligations and ethical selfishness. Then the fellowship withdrew their offer. Politely. Formally. But the line that stung the most, "Concerns have been raised about your ability to foster a collaborative team culture," wasn't about science. It was about the smear campaign launched by my own mother. They called me heartless. Cold. A careerist. They said I was abandoning my dying sister for professional vanity. The story had spread through group chats, social media, extended family like a disease of its own, virulent, fast-moving, impossible to contain. I didn't yell. I didn't confront. I just drove to the hospital, signed the donor consent papers with hands that no longer felt like mine, and walked outside into the parking lot where I finally broke. There's a kind of crying that doesn't come from your eyes. It comes from your ribcage, from the way your lungs forget how to breathe. I doubled over behind the wheel of my parked car, shaking with the soundless agony of someone who had always swallowed grief and finally found it too big to contain. I gave her my blood, my marrow, my body, and still, it wasn't enough. 2 weeks later, we were at dinner. Emily had regained color, her cheeks rosy from prednisone, her voice loud and laughing. The transplant went well. She was recovering. Everyone was happy. Then she looked at me across the table with a smirk I recognized from 1,000 playground humiliations and whispered, "Well, At least you finally did something useful." The table roared with laughter. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin, overcome with joy, and smiled like it was the sweetest thing anyone had ever said. I didn't speak. I just stood, walked to the sink, rinsed my plate, and left it there, ceramic still warm from food I hadn't tasted. As I walked up the stairs to my room, I realized something vital. I wasn't staying. I was biding time. The life I lost, my program, my research, my escape, it wasn't gone. It had simply been delayed. Because someday, they would need me again. And this time, I would not answer. There comes a moment when silence, once your refuge, starts to feel like a prison made of everything you never dared to ask. For most of my life, I had lived inside that kind of silence, obedient, measured, controlled, not because I lacked the capacity to speak, but because every time I raised a question, the air around me turned to ice. I learned to interpret the unspoken language of discomfort. I learned to retreat when conversations grew sharp at the edges. I learned to take care of everyone else, as if self-erasure were some noble legacy I had inherited without knowing. But after the transplant, after I gave them everything and they still looked at me like a well that would never run dry, something inside me shifted in a way that could not be reversed. I began to question the script I had memorized. Not just the parts about Emily or our mother's selective love or the sabotage that cost me my career. No. I began to question everything, including myself. It started with therapy. Not the polite, surface-level sessions I had tried in medical school, where you say just enough to sound cooperative, but keep your truth folded like a knife in your pocket. This was different. I found a therapist named Dr. Hale, older, unapologetically direct, and uninterested in validating the version of me I had constructed for survival. She didn't waste time coddling my guilt. She asked hard questions. She called out deflections. And in our third session, she said something that hit harder than any diagnosis I'd ever delivered. "Leah, I think it's time you stop proving your worth to people who've made it very clear they don't want to see it." It landed so hard I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was true in a way that left me breathless. She pushed me to set boundaries, to stop explaining my decisions, to stop justifying my presence like I was constantly auditioning for space in my own life. And as the weeks passed, I began to reclaim pieces of myself I didn't know I'd buried. I started reading for pleasure again. I reconnected with a former colleague who whispered that the fellowship loss was political, not permanent. And slowly, I made room for curiosity about my future, yes, but also about my past. That curiosity became obsession after one specific evening. We were at a family dinner, a reluctant gathering I only attended because my father begged me in his soft, tentative way, his voice carrying the weight of someone who never took sides. Emily was radiant, as always, basking in the attention of her recovery arc. She wore a flowing sweater that screamed curated vulnerability and made a passing joke about her miracle marrow. Our mother beamed. I stayed quiet, chewing my overcooked chicken like it had committed a personal offense. It was Aunt Doreen who broke the pattern. She was tipsy, always a lightweight, and leaning too far into her second glass of wine when she turned to me with a smirk and said, "Your real mother would have been proud, you know. She always said you had her stubborn streak." The fork froze halfway to my mouth. "What?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Doreen blinked, the fog of Chardonnay lifting briefly, and then she laughed. "Oh, I meant your mom, Denise. Of course. Just figures of speech, you know." But I didn't know. And that night, I began to dig. It started innocently with old family photos. Our mother kept albums in a locked drawer in the study. She never hid the key well, just tucked into the ceramic bowl above the mantel like no one would ever bother. I waited until the house was empty, then opened the drawer and started turning pages. That's when I found it. A photograph, sun-faded and dog-eared, tucked between two others like it had been forgotten. I lifted it with trembling fingers. There I was, maybe 2 years old, clinging to the leg of a woman I didn't recognize. She was tall, with auburn hair and a crooked smile that didn't match anyone I knew. Her hand rested on my shoulder, not stiffly, not for the camera, but like she belonged there. The back of the photo said nothing. Just a date. One I couldn't place. I stared at the image for a long time, like maybe the longer I looked, the more truth I could extract from it. But no answers came. Just questions. That night, I ordered the test. One of those ancestry kits. Not because I expected anything, honestly. I thought I'd prove myself wrong and find confirmation that I was simply spiraling from stress. But something in my chest, some whisper of doubt that had lived in me since childhood, told me the results would matter more than I could imagine. They arrived 4 weeks later. I was standing at the kitchen counter, sipping coffee and reading clinical trial updates on my phone when the notification pinged. Your results are ready. I clicked, expecting a map, a percentage breakdown of regional DNA, something dull and expected. But instead, I saw it. Immediate family match. None detected. At first, I assumed there had been a mistake. I had Emily's name plugged into the system. Our mothers, too. It was all blank. No shared DNA. No common markers. Not even distant alignment. I ran it again. Bought a second test. Sent it through a different company. Same result. Emily and I shared nothing. And neither of our parents, neither of the people I had broken myself for, were genetically connected to me in any way. It felt like vertigo. Like the floor beneath me had given out. Everything I knew, everything I believed about my place in this family, was built on a lie so thorough, so complete, I had never thought to question it. I confronted my father first. Because he had always been the softer one, the quieter one. The one who looked at me sometimes like he wanted to say something but never did. We sat on the back porch. It was raining. He was nursing a cup of tea that had long gone cold. I handed him the printed results without speaking. He read them slowly. His face didn't change at first. But then his eyes grew glassy and his hand began to tremble. I was wondering when this would come out, he said finally, voice low and heavy. And then the truth unraveled. My birth mother had been his cousin Elena. She was young, unmarried, and struggling when she gave birth to me. A month later, she died in a car crash. Sudden, brutal, unplanned. There was no formal adoption, no paperwork, just an agreement between relatives. My mother, Denise, had insisted we never speak of it. She's ours now, she had said. She's one of us. That's the end of it. But I'm not, am I? I said, more bitterly than I meant to. I've never really been one of you. He looked like he wanted to argue. But then he nodded. No, he said softly. You were never treated like her own. I tried, Leah. God, I tried. I left without saying goodbye. Back in my room, I stared at the photo again, me and the woman with the auburn hair, and felt a grief I didn't know how to hold. Not just for the truth I never knew, but for every moment I spent trying to earn a place in a family that had never seen me as truly theirs. And now I knew why. I wasn't. You ever step into a room so heavy with performance you can almost feel the stage lights even though there's no stage? That's what Emily's post-transplant recovery party felt like. Not a celebration. Not a genuine gathering of love or gratitude. Just another meticulously crafted performance where everyone in the room already knew their lines, except me. They handed out favors in tiny organ-shaped gift bags. They served cocktails named the Miracle Marrow and Sister's Blood. They decorated the backyard with Instagrammable signs that read resilient, radiant, reborn. Every inch of space was curated to orbit around Emily, her journey, her healing, her narrative of survival that somehow, miraculously, left no room for the person who gave her the very marrow that made this whole spectacle possible. Me. I had almost skipped it. I'd stared at the invitation, an ivory envelope embossed with gold foil and fake empathy, for an hour before deciding that if they wanted a storybook ending, they were going to have to hear the epilogue too. And this time, I would be the one to narrate. When I arrived, no one noticed. No one ever does. I wore a simple black dress and a long coat, not for fashion, but for armor. I carried a small clutch. Inside it, folded with surgical precision, were the printed DNA results. The truth. The kind that doesn't whisper. The kind that detonates. The garden was filled with laughter and lights. People mingled like extras on a sitcom set. There was Emily, radiant in white, standing under a floral arch like it was her wedding day to herself. Our mother stood beside her, beaming like she was presenting a queen to her court. My father hovered near the punch table, nursing a drink and pretending not to exist. A familiar look. Then came the microphone. A tinkling of glass, a call for attention. Our mother, dressed in what she probably called elegant grief, raised her hand with theatrical solemnity. The crowd hushed instantly. "I want to thank all of you," she began, her voice thick with the kind of emotion she could summon on command, "for being here to witness this miracle. Emily is a fighter, a light, a gift. And today we celebrate her strength, her grace, her indomitable spirit." Applause erupted. I stood in the back, frozen. But she continued, "None of this would have been possible without Leah's sacrifice." Heads turned. A few hands clapped again, hesitantly. I didn't move. "Yes, Leah gave her bone marrow," she said, with a dry smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It was expected. After all, that's what family does." I felt something twist in my chest. She wasn't done. "I won't lie," she added, with a laugh that dripped poison. There was a moment, just a moment, where Leah hesitated. Career ambitions, you know. But in the end, she did the right thing. Just a little late. The silence that followed wasn't respectful. It was suffocating. People looked at me now. Eyes full of judgment, confusion, performative pity. And that's when I stepped forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. But I spoke clearly, loudly enough that even the wind paused to listen. "Actually," I said, reaching into my purse and unfolding the papers with a precision that felt ceremonial, "she's not my sister." It landed like a thunderclap. The crowd rippled with gasps and then stillness. Our mother's smile froze mid-expression. Emily blinked like she hadn't understood the words, or worse, feared she had. "These are DNA test results," I continued, holding the papers like a verdict. I took 2 separate tests. Different companies. Both confirmed the same thing. Emily and I are not biologically related. In fact, I share no genetic markers with either of our parents. My voice did not shake. My hand did not tremble. Because for the first time in my life, I was not asking to be heard. I was commanding it. I turned slowly to face my mother. "You didn't raise me. You used me. You knew the truth. You always knew. And that's why you never loved me the way you loved her." Someone in the back choked on their drink. A fork hit a plate. Somewhere, a child asked, "What does that mean?" Emily stepped forward, her voice sharp and high-pitched with fury. "You're trying to ruin my moment." I turned to her, locking eyes with the girl who had demanded center stage in every room we ever entered. "This was never your moment, Emily. It was stolen from someone else before you were even old enough to realize it." The silence turned electric. Our mother moved suddenly, fast, like a switch had flipped in her. She lunged toward me, hands reaching for the papers. "Give me those," she hissed, no longer performing, just panicking. I stepped back. "No." Then I turned. And I walked out. The wind hit my face like baptism. My shoes crunched against the gravel as the house behind me dissolved into chaos. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because the truth doesn't require applause. It just needs to be said. And I had finally said it. I used to believe closure looked like a grand gesture, tears, apologies, some cinematic moment where everyone finally realized the damage they'd done and begged for forgiveness. I thought it would be loud, undeniable, filled with fireworks or flames. But in the end, real closure was quiet, unassuming. It looked like a screen lighting up with a single email. It sounded like the hum of a plane engine preparing for takeoff. And it felt like finally breathing without guilt crushing my chest like a vice. 2 weeks after the party, after the papers and the silence and the explosion that tore through our family's carefully constructed fiction, I sat across from a committee of 4. They were from the fellowship program, the same one that had rescinded their offer with the polished cruelty of a press release. I had filed my complaint not with vengeance, but with evidence, screenshots of my mother's slander, emails from colleagues, and a detailed timeline of how the narrative had been hijacked. I expected resistance. I braced for another polite dismissal. What I got instead was a long pause. And then, the words I thought I'd never hear: "We believe you. And we want to offer you a second opportunity, if you're still interested." I didn't cry. I didn't jump or shout. I just nodded and said, yes. But not here. Not in the city. They understood. 3 days later, I received the official letter, a placement in the Seattle branch. A different team. A different lab. A new city with fog-thick mornings, coffee that tasted like something earned, and no one who knew me as the shadow of a girl who once bled for people who saw her as disposable. But before I left, there was one thing I had to do. I drove 6 hours alone, through a stretch of gray highway that cut through forgotten towns and endless sky. The cemetery was small, quiet, nestled behind an old Lutheran church with paint that had begun to flake like memory. Her name was Elena, my birth mother, the woman in the photo, the woman who had died before I ever had the chance to remember her voice. The headstone was modest, weathered but clean. No flowers, no tokens. Just her name, her dates, and the echo of a life never given the chance to unfold. I knelt beside her and placed the photo between us. "I don't know what you would have wanted for me," I said aloud, the breeze carrying my voice like a secret too tired to be whispered anymore. "But I think you would have wanted better than what I got. And I think you would have fought harder for me than they ever did." I paused. My chest tightened. "So I'm going to try," I said. "I'm going to live like someone you would have been proud of. Not because I owe you. Not because I need to prove anything. But because I want that for myself now." I left the picture there. A gift. A goodbye. A beginning. The next day, my father sent a letter. A real one. Not a text. Not a voicemail. Written in ink, trembling and smudged in places. He said he had failed me. That he had watched me drown for years and told himself I was swimming. That he hadn't known about the adoption details until it was too late, and once he did, he was too weak to speak. "I thought silence would keep peace," he wrote. "But all it did was keep you invisible." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some things aren't meant to be undone. But I folded the letter and kept it anyway, not for forgiveness, but as proof that even cowardice, when cracked open, can bleed regret. Then came the final voicemail. It was from her. My mother, no, the woman who raised me. The woman who had taught me, in 1,000 subtle cuts, that love was conditional and visibility had to be earned. Her voice was cold, controlled. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she said. "After everything we did for you. After all the years we spent raising you. You might not share our blood, but you'll always be part of this family. And you'd do well to remember who gave you a name. Who gave you a life." I listened once. Then I deleted it. There were no more explanations to offer. No more arguments to have. No more doors to leave half open just in case someone finally knocked. I blocked her. I blocked Emily. I blocked every number that made my stomach twist in anticipation of guilt masquerading as love. And then I packed my last bag. At the airport, I moved like someone who finally knew their own shape. No hesitations. No second glances. Just steady steps toward a gate that would take me as far from my former life as the sky would allow. I boarded without fanfare. I didn't text anyone. I didn't need to say goodbye. As the plane rose above the city that had once buried me in expectations, I looked out the window. In my hand, folded carefully like something sacred, was the only thing I brought from my past, a photo of a little girl clinging to a woman with auburn hair and a crooked smile. I held it gently. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was holding the truth.